The desert was silent that evening, except for the whisper of the wind moving across the sand. The sun had just disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Ethan Wells stood near his small farmhouse, wiping the dust from his hands after a long day of repairing fences. He lived far from the city, in a quiet part of Arizona where the nights were peaceful and the stars shone like diamonds scattered across the sky. For most people, such a lonely place would feel empty. But for Ethan, it was home. It was where he could breathe. He had lived alone for nearly 3 years now, ever since his wife Clara passed away after an illness. Since then, the world had grown quieter for him. He spoke less, smiled less, and his days followed the same pattern. Morning chores, repairing tools, watching the sunset, then sleeping under a ceiling of stars that only reminded him of everything he had lost. But that night, the night of the storm, everything began to change. Around midnight, the sky broke open. Thunder rolled across the desert like the growl of some great beast. Lightning split the sky, flashing white and blue over the barren land. Ethan sat inside his small wooden house holding a cup of coffee, listening to the sound of rain striking the roof. It was unusual to have such a strong storm this time of year. He thought it would pass quickly. Then he saw it. At first, he thought it was lightning. A streak of blue light shot across the sky, not jagged like a thunderbolt, but smooth, controlled, almost like a craft. It moved fast, burning bright, and then suddenly it fell. A booming sound followed a few seconds later, shaking the ground beneath his feet. The window glass rattled, and the coffee spilled from his cup. "What in the world?" he murmured, grabbing his flashlight and his coat. He hesitated for a moment. The smart thing to do would be to wait until morning. The desert was dangerous at night, but something deep inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him he needed to go. So he took his truck and drove out into the storm. The rain had already begun to fade, leaving a faint mist that hung over the ground. The road was muddy and the headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only rocks and sand. Then after a few miles, Ethan noticed a strange glow in the distance. It wasn't fire, but something softer, bluish, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He parked his truck and stepped out, pulling his coat tighter around him. The glow came from a small crater about 20 feet wide. The edges of the sand were blackened, still warm, as if something had crashed from the sky. In the center of it lay a strange object, metallic, round, and smooth. It looked like a capsule about the size of a small bathtub. Ethan's pulse quickened. He stepped closer, shining his flashlight on it. The surface of the capsule shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting his face in distorted ripples. Symbols were etched across it, not English, not any language he had ever seen. They seemed to shift slightly as he looked at them, glowing faintly. "Looks like something out of a movie," he whispered. He tapped it gently with the handle of his flashlight. The sound was unlike metal, more like glass and energy mixed together. Suddenly, the capsule emitted a soft hiss and Ethan jumped back. The light on its surface grew brighter, pulsing faster. Then with a faint click, it opened. Inside, surrounded by a silvery mist, lay a small figure. Ethan froze. At first, he thought it was a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. But as he leaned closer, he realized it wasn't quite human. The child's skin was pale with a faint silver glow, smooth and delicate like glass. Tiny veins of blue light ran beneath the surface, gently pulsing. Its eyes, closed at first, slowly opened, revealing irises that shimmered with colors that didn't seem to exist in the human world. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The child blinked at him, weak and trembling. "Hey there, are you okay?" Ethan asked softly, kneeling beside the capsule. His hands shook as he reached out. The child tilted its head slightly as if studying him. It didn't speak but made a faint sound, soft and musical like a whisper carried by the wind. Ethan could see it was shivering. Without thinking, he took off his coat and wrapped it gently around the small body. It was light, too light, as if made of air and light rather than flesh. The child's eyes followed his movements closely, and when he touched its arm, the blue veins under its skin brightened for a moment. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe now." The child blinked again, then closed its eyes, breathing slowly. It seemed exhausted, like it had traveled a long way. Ethan looked around the crater. The rain had stopped completely. The air was quiet again. He felt something stir inside him, not fear, but a strange protectiveness. He didn't understand what this being was or where it came from, but he couldn't leave it there in the cold desert night. He lifted the child carefully, holding it close to his chest. To his surprise, it felt warm, almost soothing, like a small sun pressed against his heart. The capsule behind him dimmed, its light fading until it was just dull metal again. Ethan carried the child to his truck, laying it gently on the seat and covering it with another blanket. As he drove back, the headlights cut through the mist and the silence in the truck was heavy. Every now and then he glanced at the child. Its chest rose and fell slowly, glowing faintly with each breath. When he reached home, he placed the child on his couch near the fire. He fetched a towel, some warm water, and one of Clara's old blankets. The child stirred a little, making a faint humming sound that reminded him of wind chimes. Ethan sat beside it, studying the small face. The features were peaceful, almost angelic, but there was something ancient in its expression, like wisdom buried in innocence. He couldn't stop thinking about the crash. If it really fell from the sky, what did that mean? Was it alone? Were there others coming? He shook his head. One thing at a time, he said to himself. He gently touched the child's hand. Its fingers were long and delicate, ending in faintly glowing tips. When his skin made contact, a spark of blue light passed between them. Not painful, just warm. The child's eyes opened for a moment. It looked at him directly, and Ethan felt something indescribable, a connection like a wordless thought forming between them. Help. The voice wasn't spoken aloud, but Ethan heard it, not with his ears, but somewhere deep in his mind. He gasped softly, pulling back in surprise. The child's expression didn't change. It just blinked slowly, as if it had used the last of its strength to reach out to him. Then it drifted into sleep again. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the fire. The sound of the crackling wood was the only thing breaking the silence. His heart was still racing, but he couldn't deny what he had seen. Whatever that being was, it was alive, fragile, and in need of help. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he had a purpose again. As the night deepened, the storm clouds cleared, revealing a sky full of stars. Ethan glanced through the window. Somewhere out there, maybe millions of miles away, was the place this child had come from. He wondered what kind of world it must be, bright, peaceful, or maybe dangerous. But one thing was certain. The universe was far bigger than he had ever imagined. He looked back at the child sleeping on his couch. Its soft glow lit the room faintly like moonlight. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, the first in a long time. Guess you're staying here tonight. Little one, he whispered. He turned off the lamp, letting the firelight flicker across the walls. Outside, the wind had gone still. The desert lay quiet once more, but inside that humble farmhouse, something extraordinary had begun. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the night he found the capsule would mark the beginning of a journey that would change not just his life, but the fate of two worlds. Morning sunlight crept slowly through the curtains of Ethan's farmhouse. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air clear and cool. Birds began to sing in the distance, their voices soft and cheerful. But Ethan's mind was still full of questions. He sat on the edge of his old armchair, his eyes fixed on the couch where the strange child lay sleeping. The faint silver glow that had filled the room last night was softer now. Wrapped in a blanket, the child looked peaceful, almost human, if not for the faint blue lines that ran under its skin and the way its chest rose and fell with a quiet hum. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he murmured. He had barely slept a few hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the night before. The light falling from the sky, the capsule opening, the glowing eyes looking up at him. It had felt like a dream. Yet here the child was, real as the morning sun. When the child stirred, Ethan straightened. It opened its eyes slowly, blinking against the light. Its gaze wandered around the room, the wooden walls, the table, the fire that had burned out, before finally settling on Ethan. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the child sat up, clutching the blanket like it was trying to understand what was happening. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here." You remember me?" The child tilted its head. Its eyes glowed faintly again, full of curiosity. Then it pointed at him. A small, gentle motion. and gave a sound that was almost like a question. Ethan smiled nervously. "Yeah, I'm Ethan, that's my name." He pointed to himself again. "Ethan." The child blinked once, then pointed to its own chest. "L. Leo." The voice was soft, musical, like wind passing through glass. "Leo," Ethan repeated. "That your name?" The child nodded. Ethan's smile grew wider. "All right then, Leo, that's a good name." He couldn't believe it. The child could speak, or at least mimic words. It was learning, fast. As the day went on, Ethan tried to make sense of everything. He gave Leo a small bowl of warm soup, though he wasn't sure if it would eat human food. To his surprise, Leo didn't eat. It only touched the bowl, and for a second the soup glowed faintly. Then it smiled, as if that was enough. Ethan decided not to question it. He watched as Leo explored the house. Every small thing fascinated the child. The ticking clock, the flame from the stove, the sound of running water. When Ethan turned on the radio, Leo's eyes widened and it reached toward the sound with both hands, humming softly in the same rhythm as the music. Ethan couldn't help but laugh. "You like that, huh?" Leo looked at him, then smiled. A real smile, bright and full of wonder. That simple smile melted something inside Ethan's chest, something that had been frozen since Clara's death. It wasn't fear that he felt anymore. It was connection. Later that afternoon, Ethan took Leo outside. The desert stretched endlessly around them, golden sand, scattered rocks, and a bright blue sky. Leo's eyes lit up as soon as they stepped into the sunlight. It raised its hands toward the sky, and the blue veins under its skin began to glow more brightly. "You like the sun?" Ethan asked, smiling. Leo nodded eagerly. Then, as if to show him something, the child spread its fingers wide, and the air shimmered slightly around them. A small gust of wind swirled through the sand, soft and playful. Ethan's hat almost flew off, and he let out a surprised laugh. "Hey, did you just do that?" Leo giggled, a soft musical sound that filled the air. Ethan stared in awe. He had seen many things in his life, storms, droughts, even strange lights in the sky, but nothing like this. This was something beyond science, beyond explanation, and yet instead of fear he felt wonder. Days passed and the bond between them grew. Ethan taught Leo small things: how to use a spoon, how to open doors, how to draw shapes with a pencil. In return, Leo showed him little miracles: how to make a dying plant bloom again, how to calm a frightened animal, how to turn a drop of water into a shining crystal for a few seconds before it melted away. Every night, Leo would stand by the window staring up at the stars. Sometimes its eyes would fill with a strange sadness and its glow would dim. Ethan would join it by the window, folding his arms. "You miss your home, don't you?" he'd ask softly. Leo didn't speak, but it nodded once. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, I know what that feels like." He thought of Clara then, her smile, her laughter, the warmth she brought to the house. Losing her had left a hole in his world, a silence he couldn't fill, but somehow this little being had brought light back into that silence. He realized that Leo wasn't just a guest in his home. It was a reminder that even in the coldest emptiness, life could still surprise you. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Leo sat near the porch watching the sky turn red. Ethan sat beside it sipping tea. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to watch the stars with my wife. She loved the night sky. Said it made her feel small, but in a good way, like she was part of something big." Leo looked at him curiously, then pointed to the stars beginning to appear above. "Home," it said softly. Ethan smiled sadly. "Yeah, I figured." Leo turned to look at him, and for a moment their eyes met. Man and child, human and alien. And Ethan felt something wordless pass between them. A promise, maybe. A kind of understanding. The world was vast, but somehow, fate had chosen to bring the two of them together. That night, something strange happened. Ethan was asleep when he woke suddenly to a faint humming sound. The air in the room shimmered with a soft blue light. He sat up quickly and saw Leo standing near the window again, hands raised, eyes closed. "Leo," he called softly. The child didn't answer. The light around it grew brighter, and for a moment Ethan saw shapes, floating symbols glowing in the air like the ones on the capsule. They moved slowly, forming a pattern that looked almost like a map. Ethan stood, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" Leo opened its eyes, and Ethan heard the same voice in his mind as before, soft and gentle. They are calling. Ethan's heart raced. Who's calling? Leo turned to him, eyes full of light. My people. The symbols flickered and then vanished, leaving only the faint glow on the floor. Leo looked tired, its shoulders drooping. Ethan caught it as it stumbled forward, carrying it back to the couch. Easy there, he said, wrapping the blanket around it again. You need rest. Leo's eyes fluttered open for a second. Ethan, good, it whispered. He smiled. Yeah, I'm here. Then the child closed its eyes again, falling into a deep sleep. Ethan sat beside it, heart heavy with thoughts he couldn't name. If someone, or something, was calling for Leo, then it meant there were others out there. Maybe ships, maybe whole worlds waiting for their lost child. And if they came looking, what would they do if they found it here? The next morning, Ethan walked out to the crater where he had first found the capsule. The rain had washed most of it away, but the metal shell still lay half buried in the sand. The symbols on it no longer glowed. It was cold now, silent. He touched the surface gently as if expecting a reaction. Nothing. He sighed. Guess you're not waking up again, huh? But as he turned to leave, a faint shimmer passed through the capsule, almost invisible. Ethan froze. It was still active somehow, still connected. He looked back toward the farmhouse in the distance where Leo was still sleeping. His chest tightened. Something's coming, he whispered. The desert wind answered only with silence. That night, the stars above the desert seemed brighter than ever. Ethan sat on the porch watching the sky with a strange feeling, half awe, half worry. Leo sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket, its silver glow shining faintly in the dark. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. For the first time in years, Ethan felt alive and like his world had color again. But deep down he also felt a quiet fear, because somewhere in the endless night sky he knew something was moving, something that was searching, and soon it would find them. Days turned into weeks. Life at the farmhouse had quietly changed since the night Ethan found the capsule. Once silent and lonely, his home now felt alive again, filled with laughter, small sounds, and a strange sense of peace. Leo was learning fast. The child could now speak short sentences in English. Ethan had started keeping a small notebook where he wrote down the new words Leo learned every day. It was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. Every word, every smile, every curious question filled Ethan's heart with warmth. They had developed a simple routine. In the mornings, Ethan would feed the chickens and check the fences while Leo followed him, asking about everything. What is this? Leo would ask, pointing to a hammer. That's a tool, Ethan would say, handing it over carefully. We use it to fix things. Fix. Yeah, Ethan explained, smiling. When something is broken, you fix it. You make it right again. Leo thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Fix is good. That one simple word made Ethan pause. It was strange how a word could mean so much. He wasn't sure if Leo was talking about tools, or about him. In the evenings, they sat outside and watched the sunset. Leo would trace patterns in the sand using a stick, creating beautiful shapes that glowed faintly before fading away. Ethan couldn't explain how the light appeared, but he never asked. It felt private, sacred somehow, like magic that wasn't meant to be questioned. But one night, something unexpected happened. It began with a sound. A faint, distant hum, like a radio static mixed with wind. Ethan was sitting inside repairing a broken lamp when the sound came from his old radio. It wasn't turned on, yet it started to buzz softly. He frowned, walked over, and tapped the radio. The noise grew louder. The dial glowed faintly blue, the same color as Leo's light. Then a voice came through, faint and distorted. It wasn't English, but somehow Ethan understood. It wasn't words exactly. It was more like feelings turned into sound. Searching. Lost child. Ethan froze. His heart started pounding. Leo, he called quietly. Come here. The child came running from the kitchen holding a small wooden toy Ethan had made. When Leo saw the radio, its glow dimmed instantly. Leo, Ethan said softly. Do you know what this is? Leo looked frightened, a first for the usually calm and curious child. Its eyes widened and it shook its head slowly. But Ethan could tell. Leo did know. The sound grew stronger, the message repeating over and over. Ethan turned the radio off, but the hum continued, echoing faintly through the walls. Is that your people? He asked. Leo looked at him, then at the floor. Its small hands trembled as it whispered, They come. Ethan's throat tightened. They're coming here? Leo nodded slowly. They... Look for Leo. Ethan felt 100 thoughts rush through his mind. He had known this day might come, but he wasn't ready. What if they thought he had hurt Leo? What if they didn't understand humans? What if they took Leo away forever? He looked at the child again, small, glowing softly in the dim light, eyes full of innocence and fear. You're safe here, Leo, he said quietly. I won't let anyone hurt you. Leo shook its head. Not hurt. They scared. They think lost forever. Then we need to show them you're okay, Ethan said. But how? The child didn't answer. Instead, it walked to the window and looked up at the stars. The soft blue glow returned to its skin, brighter this time. Ethan followed its gaze. The night sky looked normal, yet he could sense something different in the air. The desert felt alive. The next few days were strange. Small, unexplained things started happening around the farm. The animals became restless at night. The lights in the house flickered randomly. Ethan's tools would move from one place to another, even though he was sure he hadn't touched them. Once, in the early morning, he stepped outside and saw a thin beam of light far away in the desert, moving slowly like a searchlight. It disappeared after a few seconds, leaving him staring at the horizon in silence. He knew they were getting closer. Leo seemed to sense it too. The child was quieter than usual. Sometimes Ethan would find Leo sitting by the window, humming softly, its eyes full of distant thoughts. Are you scared? Ethan asked one night. Leo looked at him, shaking its head. No, but you... Sad, Ethan gave a weak smile. Yeah, I guess I am. He didn't want to lose Leo. This small being had brought meaning back to his lonely life. It was as if the universe had sent Leo to heal something broken inside him. The thought of saying goodbye again, first Clara, now Leo, felt unbearable. But deep down, he knew love wasn't about keeping someone forever. It was about giving them the freedom to go home. Still, he couldn't help but hope that maybe somehow Leo would stay. One evening, as Ethan was checking the fences, Leo came running to him. Ethan, it called, its voice clear and urgent. Ethan dropped the hammer in surprise. What's wrong? Leo pointed toward the sky. Look. He followed its finger and froze. There, high above the desert, several faint lights were moving across the night sky. They weren't stars. They weren't planes either. They moved in a slow, perfect formation, glowing white and blue. A chill ran down his spine. They found us. The lights hovered for a few minutes, then one of them broke away, descending slowly until it disappeared behind a distant hill. Ethan's mind raced. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He had to protect Leo no matter what. Come on, he said, grabbing the child's hand. We're going inside. They ran back to the farmhouse. Ethan locked the door, even though he knew a lock wouldn't stop whatever was coming. Leo stood near the window watching the stars with wide eyes. Leo, Ethan said, kneeling in front of it. Listen to me. If they come, I'll talk to them. I'll tell them you're safe, that I didn't hurt you. Leo's voice trembled. They not understand words. They use mind, like this. Ethan remembered the night he first heard Leo's voice in his head. Then I'll try, he said. I'll think. I'll show them what happened. Leo looked unsure. They may take you. Ethan smiled sadly. Then I guess we'll see what kind of peoples or beings they are. That night, Ethan barely slept. He sat by the window, rifle in his lap, not to fight but to feel less helpless. The desert was quiet. The wind had stopped. The stars were unusually bright. Around midnight, the air began to shimmer. Ethan stood slowly. The shimmering grew stronger, forming a faint circular shape in the sky, a glowing ring of light. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating through his bones. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot down from the sky, landing right outside the house. Ethan, Leo whispered, clutching his arm. They hear. The light grew brighter until Ethan had to shield his eyes. When it faded, several tall figures stood in the sand. They were slender, glowing faintly, their faces hidden beneath smooth helmets that shimmered like glass. Leo stepped forward. Home, it said softly. One of the beings raised a hand, and Ethan felt a sudden warmth in his mind, like a wave of thought touching his own. Images flashed before his eyes. Stars, planets, a bright world full of light, a worried mother searching, and finally, Leo falling through the darkness. Then another image appeared. Ethan's face. His life, his loss, his kindness. The beings turned their gaze toward him. Ethan didn't hear words, but he felt understanding. They knew. Leo walked closer to one of them and placed its small hand against the being's arm. A faint light passed between them, like energy flowing home. The taller figure knelt, and Ethan saw something like relief pass across its glowing form. Leo looked back at Ethan. Its eyes were full of tears of light. "Ethan, thank you." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he smiled and whispered, "Go home, kid." A beam of light surrounded Leo and the other beings. The air shimmered again, growing brighter until Ethan could barely see. And then, silence. When he opened his eyes, the desert was empty. Only faint blue dust sparkled in the air before fading away. Ethan stood there for a long time, the cold night wind brushing against his face. He looked up at the stars, wondering if Leo was safe, wondering if it remembered him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. Somewhere out among the endless stars, a small light flickered like a heartbeat, and Ethan knew that Leo was still out there thinking of him too. The night sky above the desert had never looked so strange. Clouds rolled in from nowhere, glowing faintly from within, as if something behind them was alive. Ethan stood on his porch, his heart beating fast. The air felt electric, the wind cold and heavy with tension. Inside the small house, Leo sat by the window watching the stars. Its silver-blue skin shimmered faintly in the darkness, and its bright eyes reflected the lightning that danced across the horizon. It looked peaceful, but Ethan could see a sadness in its gaze. He took a deep breath and stepped back inside. "Leo," he said softly, "something is happening out there." The child turned to him, blinking slowly. It tilted its head the way it always did when it was trying to understand human words. Then, almost as if answering him, the soft blue glow around its body grew brighter. The air hummed faintly. Ethan walked closer. "Is it them?" he whispered. Leo didn't speak, but its eyes lowered, and it placed one hand on the glass. Outside, a faint beam of white light swept across the desert floor, scanning like a silent searchlight. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew deep down what this meant. The message he had heard on the radio: they are searching. They want their child back. It wasn't just a coincidence. They were here. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His throat felt tight. He looked around the small house, the wooden table, the half-finished drawings Leo had made, the mug of coffee gone cold beside his chair. Every piece of this place held a memory of the weeks he had spent with the strange child. He had laughed again. He had felt alive again. After years of silence, his home had finally been filled with warmth and sound. And now, that warmth was slipping away. He sat down slowly beside Leo. "You know," he said with a shaky smile, "when you first showed up, I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't know if you were real, but you changed everything." Leo looked up at him, blinking those glowing eyes. Then, with a small and careful motion, it reached out and touched his hand. A soft pulse of light spread from its fingers. And in that instant, Ethan saw something, not with his eyes, but with his heart. He saw a vast sky filled with stars he had never known, and a world made of light and crystal towers. He saw beings like Leo, taller and glowing brighter, walking through fields of color. He saw a family, two figures searching, calling out with desperation. And he understood. Leo wasn't meant to be here. It wasn't a creature that had come to harm him. It was a lost child, frightened, alone, and far from home. Ethan blinked away the tears that stung his eyes. "You have a family," he said quietly. "They've been looking for you all this time, haven't they?" Leo nodded once, slowly. Ethan turned to look out the window again. The beams of light were getting closer now, scanning the land like gentle waves. He could hear faint vibrations through the ground, a soft humming that wasn't thunder or wind. It was something else, something otherworldly. He stood up and moved to the small cabinet beside his bed. From the drawer, he pulled out the capsule, the same silver shell he had found that stormy night. It had cracked open when Leo emerged, but now faint lights flickered along its sides again. It was reactivating. Ethan ran his hand over the smooth metal. "Guess it's time," he whispered. Leo walked closer, watching him with a mix of curiosity and sadness. "You don't have to be afraid," Ethan said. "They're coming to take you home. That's where you belong." Leo's expression softened, but it shook its head slightly. It took a step closer to Ethan and placed both hands on his chest, right over his heart. A warmth spread through him, deep, peaceful, and full of emotion. Ethan gasped softly. He felt flashes again, not just memories of Leo's world this time, but his own. His wife's laughter, the sound of rain on the roof, the way he had once believed life could still be beautiful, even after loss. When Leo pulled its hands away, Ethan understood the message without words. The child wasn't just thanking him. It was telling him that he had healed too. A bright flash filled the horizon. The sky opened like a curtain of light. Several glowing shapes descended, quiet and graceful. They weren't ships in the human sense. They looked like living light, each one moving like it had a heartbeat. Ethan felt the ground tremble softly beneath his feet. Leo turned to the window, its glow growing brighter. Ethan's voice trembled. "It's okay, little one, go, they need you." But Leo didn't move right away. It looked back at him, its eyes full of emotion. Then, to Ethan's surprise, it pointed at the stars and then at his chest. The message was simple. "You're not alone anymore." The words hit him harder than any thunder could. He closed his eyes and nodded slowly. The air outside pulsed with light. The capsule in his hands vibrated gently, as if calling to Leo. Ethan opened the door and the wind rushed in, carrying a faint sound that almost resembled singing, soft, harmonic, and peaceful. He stepped out into the open desert with Leo beside him. The ground shimmered faintly under their feet. Above, one of the glowing shapes hovered, lowering a beam of light that touched the earth like a staircase of air. Ethan's heart pounded. "Go on," he whispered. "It's your family." Leo looked up at him one last time, and for the first time since it had arrived, it smiled. A small, warm smile that seemed to say everything words never could. Then with slow steps, it walked into the beam. The light wrapped around it gently, lifting it higher. But just before it disappeared into the glowing sky, Leo extended one hand, and a small sphere of blue light floated from its palm to Ethan. It hovered for a moment before landing in his hand, glowing softly like a living star. Ethan looked down at it speechless. The light pulsed once, then sank into his skin, leaving behind a faint warmth that spread through his body. Then, the light in the sky began to fade. The clouds drifted apart and the night fell silent again. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the stars. His heart felt heavy but not empty. The loneliness that had once ruled his days was gone. In its place was something new, peace. He whispered into the wind, "Goodbye, Leo, thank you." The stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter in response. That night, Ethan sat on his porch until the first light of dawn touched the desert. He thought about everything that had happened. The quiet man who once lived only with ghosts of memory had become something else. Someone who had seen beyond his small world. Someone who had been touched by something vast and kind. Over the next few days, he noticed small changes. His crops grew faster. His old radio, once broken, now hummed faintly with a soft tune, the same sound he had heard when the ships appeared. And sometimes, when the night was very still, a blue shimmer danced over the sand like footprints of light that led to nowhere. He didn't tell anyone. How could he? Who would believe such a story? Instead, he wrote everything down in an old notebook. Every sound, every word, every glow. And when he finished, he placed the notebook in a wooden box beside the capsule, now empty and cold. He smiled softly. "Maybe one day," he said, "someone else will find this. Maybe they'll know that the universe isn't as lonely as it seems." Then he looked up at the stars again, and for the first time in years he didn't feel small beneath them. He felt connected, like a thread of light stretched between him and the vast unknown, unbroken and eternal. The desert wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it a faint sound like laughter, light and distant. Ethan smiled and whispered back, "Take care, little one." And somewhere far away in a world of light, a small being looked up at the same stars and smiled too. The days after the lights vanished from the sky felt strangely quiet. The desert had returned to its normal calm, wide, empty, and golden under the sun. But for Ethan Wells, nothing about life was the same anymore. He would wake up every morning expecting to hear soft footsteps or see the faint glow that used to come from Leo's room. But the space was empty now. The blanket still lay on the chair, and the drawings Leo had made, strange symbols mixed with stars, still hung on the wall. At first, Ethan thought the silence would break him again. But it didn't, because this time he wasn't truly alone. Deep inside his heart, he could still feel that warmth, the tiny pulse of blue light Leo had left behind when it touched him. Every time Ethan placed his hand over his chest, he felt it, faint, calm, and alive. He didn't understand how it worked. Maybe it was a gift, or maybe it was just a memory that had become part of him. But whatever it was, it changed him. He felt stronger, peaceful, hopeful. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. The desert bloomed after the rain, and for the first time in years, Ethan noticed how beautiful it looked. He started fixing the parts of his farm that he had ignored for years. The old windmill began to spin again. The garden came alive with color. Flowers bloomed faster than they ever had, glowing faintly under the moonlight. He didn't know if it was natural or if Leo's touch had something to do with it, but he didn't question it. Sometimes, when he walked through the fields at night, he could see small trails of blue shimmer under the sand, like light buried in the earth. And every time he saw it, he smiled. It reminded him that somewhere out there, among the stars, Leo was alive and watching. Ethan also began to write again. He hadn't picked up a pen since his wife had passed away. But now the words came easily. He wrote about what he had seen, the capsule, the night sky, the light, the child. He described Leo's smile, its eyes, the strange bond they shared. He didn't try to make it sound like a science story. He wrote it as it felt, real, human, emotional. It wasn't about aliens or technology. It was about love, kindness, and understanding something bigger than himself. At the top of the first page, he wrote the title, The Light That Found Me. Every night after finishing a few pages, he would go outside, sit on his porch, and look up at the stars. He wondered if Leo's family had told others about him, the human who had cared for their child. Maybe somewhere out there his name had become a soft sound among the stars. The thought made him smile. One evening, while Ethan was fixing the windmill's base, a pickup truck approached along the dirt road. It was rare for anyone to visit him. The truck stopped and a young woman stepped out. She wore a dusty jacket and carried a camera bag over her shoulder. "Mr. Wells?" she called. Ethan wiped his hands and nodded. "That's me. My name's Clara. I work for a small science magazine. We got a few reports from people who said something fell out here a few months back. A meteor or, well, something else." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression calm. "You're a bit late, miss. Whatever fell, it's long gone." Clara smiled politely. "I figured. But still, I wanted to ask if you saw anything strange that night." Some farmers mentioned lights. Ethan looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the desert in red and gold. For a moment, he thought about telling her the truth. About Leo, the capsule, everything. But he stopped himself. The world wasn't ready to understand. Not yet. He turned back to her and smiled softly. "Just a storm," he said. "Lots of lightning. It lit up the sky like the 4th of July. Clara nodded and looked around. "Well, it's beautiful out here, peaceful." "It is," Ethan said quietly. "It really is." Before she left, she asked if she could take a picture of the horizon. Ethan agreed. As she lifted her camera, a soft glow appeared faintly near the windmill, so faint that only Ethan noticed. Clara didn't see it, but he did. It looked like a tiny blue spark, resting in the air before fading away. When she drove off, Ethan stood there for a long while, smiling to himself. "Still saying hello, huh?" he whispered to the air. Years went by. Ethan grew older, his hair silver and his hands slower, but the light in his heart never faded. The small farm became a peaceful haven for him. Sometimes animals would wander close and rest near the garden. Birds that usually avoided humans came to perch by the window. It was as if nature itself trusted him. He often sat by the porch at night with his notebook, now filled with hundreds of pages. He wrote letters to Leo, messages he knew would never be delivered in a human way, but maybe somehow would reach the stars. "Dear Leo," one letter began, "it's been 5 years since you left. The desert still glows sometimes, and I think that's your way of saying you remember me. I miss our small talks even if you never spoke a word. I hope you're happy where you are. I hope your family is proud of you. You taught me something no one else could. That love doesn't need words and that sometimes, even the smallest light can change a life forever. He would close the notebook, place his hand over his chest and smile at the sky. One night, something strange happened again, but not frightening, only beautiful. Ethan was half asleep when a soft blue glow filled his room. He sat up and looked around, thinking it might be the moonlight. But then in the middle of the room, a shape began to form, a small sphere of light, gentle and pure. It floated silently, pulsing softly. Ethan's eyes widened, but he didn't feel fear. Instead, a calm joy spread through him. The light expanded, and for a brief moment he saw a shape inside. Small, childlike, familiar. Leo. It wasn't solid, just a vision made of light and memory. But it smiled at him, that same warm smile. Ethan's heart trembled. "Leo," he whispered. The light shimmered in response, then projected faint images across the room. Scenes of a faraway world filled with blue skies, bright towers, and beings of light. It was Leo's home. The images shifted again, showing Leo grown older, stronger, surrounded by others like it. And then Ethan heard a voice, not through his ears, but through his heart. "Thank you." The voice was clear, calm, and full of emotion. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "You made it home," he said softly. "You're safe." The light pulsed again and like a heartbeat. Then, as gently as it had come, it began to fade. But before it vanished, it sent out one final spark that floated toward Ethan. When it touched his hand, it left behind a tiny mark, a glowing symbol, the same one that had been carved on the capsule. And then it was gone. The room was quiet again. Ethan sat in silence for a long time, smiling through his tears. "Goodbye, little one," he whispered. "I'll see you among the stars someday." Years later, after Ethan had passed peacefully in his sleep, a group of travelers found his home. It had been empty for years, yet the garden still bloomed, and the house glowed faintly at night. Inside, on a wooden table, they found a notebook filled with pages of writing and drawings, stars, lights, and a child made of silver blue light. On the last page, one line was written in neat handwriting. "Kindness can reach across worlds. Love can speak without words. And even in the darkest night, a single light can guide the way." The travelers kept the notebook safe. Years later, it became a story, one that spread quietly across towns and cities, inspiring people who read it. Some said it was just a tale. Others believed it was true. But in the quiet desert, on clear nights when the sky was full of stars, a faint blue glow could still be seen drifting over the sand, like a small child running joyfully home. And if you stood very still and listened, you might hear a voice carried by the wind, gentle, calm and full of warmth, whispering, "Thank you, Ethan."